Welcome to our press conference at APTA's Transform and Conference and Expo. My name is Jeff Nelson, APTA Chair and CEO and Managing Director of the Rock Island County Metropolitan Mass Transit District in Moline, Illinois. Thank you for joining us today here in Orlando, Florida for our first in-person gathering in almost 2 years. I'm honored to be here with the APTA President and CEO, Paul Skatellis, as well as fellow transportation leaders. 20 months ago, the path to an in-person event such as this week's Transform Conference was uncertain. As the consequences of COVID-19 became increasingly dire, cities and states across the country introduced stay-at-home requirements. We saw public transit revenue and ridership decline dramatically in the first several weeks of the pandemic. Nonetheless, the public transportation industry stayed on the job. We pivoted, innovated, and doubled down on our pledge to deliver essential mobile services to communities in need. One of the many lessons we learned from COVID-19 is that the pace of change has accelerated and there will be no slowing down. And our industry is going to be ready, not just to keep up, but to adapt and take advantage of new opportunities when we need to see what's coming next. Next means all the things on the horizon. Redesigning transit networks, including adding flexible routes and scheduled fixed routes. Empowering employees with tools to ensure their work hours are productive. Advancing diversity, inclusion, and equity in how our transit agencies plan, invest, and expand into our present communities. Turning our best health, safety, and security ideas that benefit our passengers into public policies that benefit the nation. Investing in resilient, eco-friendly infrastructure that protects the environment and taxpayer dollars. And improving the quality of life for all by improving access and mobility for all. I've been so proud and so impressed by the public transportation industry and what it has done in the face of the pandemic global. Collectively, we have innovated, redesigned networks, offered new flexible services, met unmet needs, invested in new equipment, protected our workers and the public, and continue to plan for the future. Today, APTA and our research partners are releasing a report on how transit agencies respond to the pandemic and how we are planning for the future. This report shows how demographics, employment, and travel trends are likely to change in the coming decades. It also includes recommendations to ensure equitable access to mobility. And it's another example of how the pandemic has changed us. As terrible as the virus has been and the toll it has taken on our nation and our world, I would like to think it has brought the best out in our industry and in our association. It gave us a new appreciation for the communities we serve and the essential role we play. It revealed how important public transportation is to mitigate the effects of climate change. It prompted us to be flexible and resourceful, to experiment, to not focus on our operating systems as we do now, but have a rather new solving problem no matter how difficult the unforeseen is. It forced us to face our industry's own historical shortcomings when it comes to racial equity and fair access to mobility. And it made us reevaluate and treasure the time with our friends, family, colleagues, and neighbors. There will always be books written about the lessons learned through the pandemic. But APTA, the public transportation industry, it comes down to this. We prevailed over crisis. Our eyes are now on the future, and all the lessons we learned these past 2 years will help us create a successful, reimagined future for public transit. Thank you again for joining us this morning. It's my honor and my pleasure to introduce APTA's President and CEO, Paul Skatellis. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, very much. Appreciate your leadership leading APTA this year as APTA Chair. Good morning to every one of you. I just looked at my watch. Is it still morning? It is, right? To the media that's not here, we wish you were here with us in person here in Orlando, Florida. This has been 2 years that we have been absent from a in-person meeting. And being together here with our some 9,000 colleagues around the country has been exhilarating. The showcase of equipment manufacturers and consultants and products and services that our industry is innovating for have really been nothing short of magnificent. And of course, allowing us in both formal session and informally to be able to exchange thoughts and ideas about where our industry is. Our remarks and our purpose this morning really is to announce the new report that we have released on the horizon, planning for post-pandemic travel. As you can well imagine, the industry has been focused on this for quite some time because the world has changed. And our industry has responded and continues to respond. And so we have, with the good graces of our leadership from around the country that have agreed to be here with us today, and one on the telephone, to share with us their personal stories about what's going on in their systems and their cities, how they're coping with this, what they've done to adapt. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to hear from them directly. And of course, our report focused on those cities as case studies and those systems in terms of what was going on. So you'll be hearing from them in a moment or two. I won't take their thunder away by any means, because they can speak directly to what they're doing. But the report really focuses and recommends a number of key areas as takeaways for us as an industry and perhaps for individual systems to look at. Institutionalizing best practices that have been learned through the COVID-19 crisis, to plan and operate more effectively and prioritizing for social equity, leveraging opportunities to expand ridership, because at the end of the day, we know transit provides innumerable benefits that go beyond ridership, but ridership is also a key, and keeping abreast of changing trends. So you're going to be hearing a lot about that in the next few minutes. I now want to briefly introduce to you who will be presenting to you in the next few moments. We are joined by Transit Agency CEOs Deborah Johnson, the CEO and General Manager of the Regional Transportation District in Denver, and she is by phone. And here in person with us is Stephanie Wiggins, CEO, Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority and LA. Catherine Kellerman, CEO of the Port Authority of Allegheny County, Pittsburgh. Julie Tim, CEO, Greater Richmond Transit Company in Richmond, Virginia. And Susan Meyer, CEO, Spokane Transit Authority in Spokane, Washington. So you're going to hear from 5 CEOs. Again, they are doing some magnificent things with their systems, all a little bit different, which is really the value of doing a report like this. It's not a cookie cutter. Everything doesn't apply equally to every system. And we're seeing great innovation and adaptation amongst these different cities and the leadership that's there. So with that, I'm now going to turn to them. And if I may, Deborah, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Well, thank you very much, Deborah. Great to be with you, at least connected here by telephone. And thanks for joining us. And why don't you kick things off and share with us what's going on in Denver?
All right. Well, first and foremost, thanks to APTA Chair Jeff Nelson and to you, Paul, President and CEO, as well as to APTA's Policy Development and Research Director, as well as Urban Institute and the Center for Neighborhood Technology for the steadfast work in helping us to focus as an industry on what public transportation looks like post-pandemic. And it is my pleasure to join you, albeit telephonically, for this very important event and introduce the body of research and what was garnered from that undertaking and how we can collectively plan to go forward for post-pandemic travel. Like what's already said, and like my colleagues know that are assembled there today and many others around the country, RTD reduced service early on in the pandemic in April of 2020, and that was the 60% of our pre-pandemic service levels due to the lack of ridership brought about by the public health orders, the shuttering of businesses, and telework. Our Reimagine RTD effort, which is develop a near-term system optimization plan and a long-term mobility plan for the future, was underway when COVID-19 reduced our ridership and changed travel behavior. In the immediate term, we recognize that ridership on some routes serving equity populations, those protected by Title VI, were not as significantly impacted as commuter routes to business centers. Though many rail lines saw significant declines in ridership, RTD's A-Line commuter rail service that connects downtown Denver to the Denver International Airport maintained ridership better than any other commuter rail line across the country. This new reality of essential travel and flexible work locations is the focus for our build back. With constrained workforce resources, our challenge is to serve the needs to equitably bring back customers. Additionally, what we have leveraged going forward is our Title VI equity analysis that we conducted in May of this year as our guidepost. Coupled with the realization that our fares are complicated and cumbersome, we are launching a robust fare study and equity analysis unlike any other RTD has taken, and that's kicking off next month. As relates to people power, during the height of the pandemic, RTD had to reconsider how to prioritize work, and some bus maintenance initiatives were delayed on vehicles that were not actively being used for service. As we all know, with the Great Resignation, the country is short-staffed. So we are instituting bonus and incentive programs to be competitive with a myriad of industries, as well as working in earnest to address hourly wages for frontline employees. During the height of the pandemic, to keep operators and customers safe, RTD implemented capacity limits on buses and trains. The agency limited buses to 15 customers, a significant drop from the 45 or more who were allowed to board prior to the pandemic, which required the agency to operate more buses to serve customers on certain routes. Navigating the financial woes of the pandemic meant staying nimble. Shortly after undergoing a workforce reduction in early January, RTD quickly recalled frontline workers once the agency received word it will receive much-needed federal COVID relief funds. The pandemic brought out the best in leveraging internal resources, such as the production and installation of more than 1,100 polycarbonate barriers by our maintenance crews to protect operators and customers, much quicker than the agency would have received from a third-party contractor. Remaining agile and flexible amidst uncertainties allowed RTD to be responsive with its service delivery, leveraging paratransit to deliver meals to one of our most vulnerable customer bases. These are initiatives that can continue as we pave a new road and we rewrite our story. RTD participated weekly in APTA calls, and meetings were leveraged to gain insights on how to secure supplies like disinfectants and personal protection equipment. Some agency officials individually reached out to other agency staff that had met at previous APTA events. And one of the best opportunities moving forward in rewriting our story is that we developed a 5-year strategic plan during the course of the pandemic that clearly defines the agency's priorities: community value, customer excellence, employee ownership, and financial success. RTD is a significant component in the economic vitality of the Denver metro region. So many individuals have relied on us during the pandemic, and we know others are relying on us to get the region moving again. So recognizing what we've garnered, we intend to keep that momentum going. We're going to remain flexible and agile as we become more responsive to the growing needs of those that need to travel about. So with that, I will now yield the floor to my colleague, Stephanie Wiggins, the CEO of LA County Metro.
Thank you, Deborah. Stephanie?
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Paul and Jeff, for this opportunity to really join you today as we share the results of this really important collaborative work with our sister transportation agencies. I would say that the pandemic really, for LA Metro, it made the invisible visible. We really heightened the importance of our essential riders, the essential workforce that we all rely on, and the essential service that we're providing. And I think it is fortuitous, Paul and Jeff, that we're having this press conference today, 4 days after the momentous action by Congress. Because while our study talks about how we're preparing for post-pandemic success, there's no further indication of a support in the success of public transit than the federal government making the largest investment in public transit ever. It really is an indication of a recognition at a national level of how important the work that we're all doing and have done over the last 18 to 20 months. Deborah outlined what Denver RTD has been doing. I venture to say we all have shared points of that. What I would want to highlight from LA Metro's perspective is, pre-pandemic, we were at 1.2 million average weekday riders. The height of the shutdowns of the pandemic last year, that would be April for us, we were down to 363,000 average weekday riders every day. That's 363,000 people, the very low income, who are essential workers who still needed our service. Today, we're upwards of over 800,000 average weekday riders. More than 70% are on the bus. The bus is coming back much faster than our rail ridership. But let me tell you what we know. During the pandemic, we leaned in and we worked with our city partners to add 29 miles of bus-only peak hour lanes to really speed up reliability and do it in an equitable way because the majority of our riders actually don't have access to a car. We work with our state legislators to pass a law that actually would hope to change the behavior of folks who illegally park and block those bus-only lanes. Because on average, we calculate blocking bus-only lanes results in about a 15-minute delay per rider on our system. On a bus, for example, 15 minutes may not seem like a lot, but it's missing an appointment, a medical appointment, it's missing school, and worst case, it's missing a job. And it's something we cannot sustain if we really want to look at equitable transit and an equitable recovery, and to do better as a transit system. We also are leveraging the nimbleness of responding to the health impact of the pandemic by really joining Julie. I'm sure she's going to talk about her transit system, but we are looking at Fairless Transit, and we launched just last month, K through 14, a 2-year pilot, for a couple of reasons. There's no doubt that the disruptive element of this pandemic has told us that in light of the significant federal investment we all received to get us through COVID, we need to rethink the way we fund transit operations in this country, particularly when those who need our lifeline service the most have difficulty coming up with the fares. So we are launching into that. This also has been an opportunity for us to reimagine public safety. We're in the process of working with our Public Safety Advisory Committee to really holistically come up with a community-based approach to dealing with safety and security on our system. We also have leaned in and continue to advance our very much-needed capital program. The Transit Center also released a study this summer that focused on accessibility. And for the LA region, you can get to 17 times more destinations by car than you can by transit. We need to change that. We need to change that not only for mobility, we need to change it for our environment and climate emergency, and we need to change it for health disparities, because you walk more when you take bus and rail than when you're driving alone in your car. So we're excited about, again, the lessons learned, the leveraging of the learnings from all of our transit agencies, and we know that as an industry, this conference alone has demonstrated that we are prepared to really advance on a national level the economic recovery, to advance it in an equitable way, and do it in a way that lifts all Americans as we look at public transportation with a new lens as a result of the work we've all collectively done.
Stephanie, thank you very much. Let's now turn to Pittsburgh and CEO at the Port Authority, Catherine Kellerman.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, ladies, for being the vanguard, Deborah as well, of the this new world which we are in after, that we're still emerging into. This world is not settled. We're all still wearing masks. The pandemic has changed us. It's changed how we perceive things. So I'd like to talk briefly about 3 issues: investment, relationships, and what is our source of excellence. First, on investment, to use Stephanie's points, this is an unprecedented opportunity to reclaim our dollars coming back from Washington, D.C. and all our communities. I'd like to individually thank Representative Mike Doyle and Representative Connor Lamb in Western Pennsylvania for all the work they did in bringing this money back home. This is a Herculean lift. This is a once-in-a-lifetime bill, and we have an opportunity to build the networks which we deserve. So I do want to thank everyone who has worked on that. I also want to talk briefly on relationships. Pennsylvania has a very strong culture of strong, good union jobs, and our agencies could not have survived the pandemic without the participation and active involvement of our union leaderships. Locally, I'd like to thank everyone at ATU Local 85 and 85A, our IBEW workers, and our Port Authority Police for all the work that they've done and the leadership they brought to the table, the communication they brought out to their members. When we lost members of our family to COVID, the union was there to counsel these folks. We were there too for management, but they were getting information out. They were talking to their members about what PPE was useful. They were coming back to management, and we were a united front in getting the resources we needed. So we cannot forget that vital role that our unions have played. And finally, I'd like to talk not just about excellence, but equity in this universe. We saw in the pandemic that transit kept our cities going. In Pittsburgh, 98 routes, all but one serves a medical facility or a grocery store. You didn't leave your house. You might have had your groceries delivered. The person who stocked your groceries came in on transit. The people who came and swept up your streets came in on transit. The drive-through you went to with 4 face masks on, the person making your food came in on transit. If you went to get COVID tested, maybe the lab staff didn't come in, but somebody who stocked that equipment came in on transit. The country would not have made it through COVID as we have without that transportation. And it's an opportunity for us to say, we deserve better with this investment. I would argue that our ridership metrics of overstuffed buses were never appropriate, especially when we look at it from an equity lens. In no other mode of transportation would you have a vehicle or a lane or a service nearly 50%, 80% oversubscribed and that be success. And we in transit have done that. Articulated buses with 70 seats would have 50 people standing, and we had to say that was good. We need to acknowledge that was never acceptable, and especially in a post-pandemic world. I love these people and we're too close. We need to do better for our passengers, more space, more frequency, more options. It's time for transit to be treated like a full member of the transportation community and all the modes that we leverage for all the good reasons that my friends are talking about. And clearly I could talk longer on this. I'm very passionate, so I will yield it to Paul before I take over.
That's great, Kathy. Thank you for that. Thank you for holding back on some things. We want to make sure we put it out there. That's the whole purpose. No, that was terrific. Let's turn to Richmond and to the Greater Richmond Transit Authority. Julie.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. It's hard to follow up on these very amazing women and the leadership that they have done in their own region, but a little bit specifically about Richmond. In 2018, before I arrived, so I can't take credit for it, the City of Richmond and GRTC did a whole system redesign and launched the BRT, Bus Rapid Transit, in the downtown corridor for the Pulse. At that time, that redesign resulted in double-digit growth of ridership at a time when across the country, a lot of ridership was actually shrinking. When COVID hit, that, of course, switched. We started to see the same ridership drops that everyone else was. However, when we looked at our own ridership, it actually only dropped to maybe 30%. And you hear across the country these drops of 60% or 80% or 90%. Why were we different in having such a low drop in our ridership? When we looked in, it really came down to the system redesign. That when we redesigned our system, when we put that in place, it was done to connect the affordable housing to dense jobs, to quality jobs downtown. And the network was designed to be able to connect people between housing and job, the local workforce. We did see a 90% drop in transit on our express route, but that was a minor part of our overall system. The majority of our riders came from the local workforce. They were essential workers, and it really highlighted, COVID really highlighted, that when other people were able to telework, when the suburban high-income workers didn't have to be on transit, our local workforce, who depended on transit that was designed to support them, continued to ride. And not only did they continue to ride, they needed to ride more often, not just to get to work, but now they needed to also be able to still connect with the workforce to healthcare, to be able to get their vaccine or to be able to get their COVID tests or be able to get their diabetes medication. Now they needed more transit to get daycare or when the schools were closing, because now they had to pick up their children where they didn't have to before. Or now they had to go to the grocery store more often because of the stockouts that happened that made it hard to get food. So before, where they might have taken transit to get to and from work and tried to get another trip, now they were having to take 3 or 4 or 5 trips in a day, and fares became the barrier. When COVID hit in March 2020, we immediately went zero fare, and we did it for the health and safety of our operators and our riders to keep them physically separated. But we quickly learned that it was the economic health of our community that was also being supported through zero fares. It really was a difficult decision about how to maintain that and how to maintain the support of our essential workforce through zero fares. But when we looked at the majority of our net revenues was specifically coming from that local workforce, it became clear to me that the fares were regressive on our low-income communities and on our disenfranchised areas. We are started to work towards a business partnership, not just with the federal government or not just with the state government and not just with the local government, with actually business partners and philanthropic communities to bridge the gap on how do we fund and replace the fares that were collected from our lowest income? How do we replace them with sponsorships from our business community for higher frequency? How do we replace it to the sponsorships for the line itself, for the physical infrastructure to make it more accessible? And how do we fill that gap for the higher frequencies in the fares? I don't know if we will be successful long term. I know that we're successful now. Our ridership on our local bus has returned to pre-pandemic levels. I will say that again. Our ridership on our local bus has returned to pre-pandemic levels. Our express bus is still down 75% for the people who can telework, but the people who can't, they're riding more. They're getting more value out of their life. They're being able to recover more quickly economically because they're able to keep that fare in their pocketbook and not make the decision between work or housing or food or healthcare. Transportation is no longer a barrier. Whenever we say that we're going to give zero fares so that people can go vote, or we're going to give zero fares so people can go to get their vaccine, or we're going to do zero fares so that someone can go get tested, what we've basically said is that fares are a barrier to access. Going zero fares eliminates that barrier and starts to make our public transportation system more equitable for everyone.
Julie, thank you very much. Let's turn now to Spokane, Washington, and CEO Susan Meyer.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this study. I learned a lot from the people who are on the team, and it's obvious we're women. And so that made this just fun to be part of a group that had very different circumstances during the pandemic, and became clear that there was a difference in how our governors addressed the pandemic early on, how our cities and health districts responded, so that each of our conditions is really a lot different. But still, it's transit, and it's transportation for essential workers. And the essential workers in our world are also the drivers and the mechanics and the employees who, in our organization of about 650 people, most people drive or maintain a vehicle. And they couldn't go home and telework. So we did send some of our technical professional staff home to telework when the governor said, if you can do it, send them home. And so we did that, and ridership fell like a rock in the early days, and we resisted the urge to cut service. And I will say that it was our leadership team, some of us saying, no, we have to cut service, ridership is so low. And others said, but where do we go from here? It's either almost full service or it's Saturday service, and we don't want to do Saturday service. So we reduced service when the universities closed, and that reduced some of our commuter routes, and we kept everything else in service. And that's how we kept people physically distanced, because we kept the same level of service for them. Everybody wears a mask, and did before it was a requirement of the TSA. And so we have people who are turning wrenches wearing masks in the garage when it's 100 degrees outside. And it has been hard for our employees. So among the things that I wanted to tell you about that I thought were good decisions in retrospect were our focus on employees. For 56 weeks in a row, we produced a video featuring one of our employees. And we called the series Community Essentials. And so we had videos that interviewed mechanics and supervisors and bus drivers and customer service agents, and we shared it with the community. So we said, here's what we're doing to keep your ride safe, with daily disinfecting and of all of the vehicles. And it got a great response, and the employees felt recognized. I'm wearing my pin today that we gave to our employees that says Essential Employee. And we had a week of gratitude where we delivered food to our employees where they were, because we couldn't have all employee meetings anymore. We couldn't gather together around a meal as we have done every 3 months, we will have 5 meetings a day in the garage set up for employees. And so we gave them a vest and we gave them a pin and we said, these are just tokens of our appreciation for what you're doing. We were able to keep everybody employed, and I understand that there were others who had a hard time bringing employees back once they were gone. So we were blessed, really, that we were able to keep people at the job site. The folks in paratransit were the most impacted. Now, I would suggest that it's easy to see who is requiring more service when you look at your paratransit demographic. They're not all low income, but many of them are. And while our paratransit service was mostly idle because we were down from 1,500 trips a day to 300 trips a day, we delivered food for Meals on Wheels, and some of our paratransit drivers cleaned buses. So we had labor support to do whatever it took to keep people employed. We did free service to vaccines and everything you can think of, and started offering a new service to riders who were 60 and not ADA eligible, because we had the capacity. And the rides for seniors, which I don't know why we call them seniors, because they're only 60, but I'm at least we're not calling them elderly, right? So we started service and that brought people into our airspace, and they could see what we're doing and how we're doing it, and that just expanded our the perception of how hard we were working to get service to people. Paratransit has rebounded dramatically more quickly than fixed route. And I don't know all the reasons for that, other than these are the folks who don't have other ways to get places other than when they're with us. And so we may have to stop the senior trips because we've got so many of our regular ADA customers back. We, in the beginning, fashioned our own barriers for our buses. They were made in-house. We talked to C-Tran in Clark County, Washington, in Vancouver, Washington, and got a picture of their barriers, and so our people built ours. And while they were being installed on all of our buses, we had people board through the back door and suspended fare collection. We have a really strong ethic at our organization and in our community around having the rider pay a part of the cost of delivering service. And boarding at the back door and the folks who were destinationless created a significant problem for us. For our employees as well, the operators were fearful. So we have a great relationship with the police, and so they rode the buses with us for a while to make sure that if people were destinationless, transit is a service to get from this place to the next place. So if you really aren't going to another place, then this transit trip isn't for you. We returned after we had installed barriers on every bus and returned to fares, and our fares are pretty affordable. And we're now going to have all of our buses fit with barriers, because there is the additional benefit of people being close to each other to have a barrier. And we have tested some and find that they're not big, heavy, bulky pieces of equipment that would create such a separation from customers that they would feel like, if the bus driver needs protection, then do I need protection too? So we ended up in a place where all of our vehicles have these barriers, and we're going to buy our new buses going forward with barriers. So it is a really good outcome. We are debt-free, and we passed a ballot measure in 2016 to implement our 10-year strategic plan called STA Moving Forward. And we have had the benefit of adding and improving service and putting out later night service. since 2017. And so we never stopped doing that. And we are blessed, and I can say that this year, remind me if there's ever a recession, our organization is supported by local sales tax, locally approved sales tax. So we're at 0.8 cents of sales tax, and sales tax was down 2 months of the pandemic, and then it has been out of the ballpark since then. So we're in a wonderful position, but it is only, federal funding is one-time funding, and we're grateful for that. Sales tax sometimes can be really productive and sometimes it can't. So when I think about fares, we're looking at ways to make transit more accessible, but without making it fare-free, because one-time money won't cover free fares forever. And so we're making it accessible, and we're introducing it to our board this month. Fare-free up to a older age than it was before, and fare-free for more groups of, rather reduced fare for more groups of people. And making it available to as many people as we can, because we have great service and we go almost everywhere, is our goal. So we're going to have fares, and we're finishing our bus rapid transit route, although it's delayed because rolled tube steel is delayed. And rolled tube steel is the part that holds the shelter roof up. So that is why our project is going to be delayed, but we're moving ahead on everything. And the money from the federal government is enabling us to start a new 10-year plan. Great. And it's going to be for 2025 to 2035. And I came from the private sector, so I didn't have a great appreciation for planning. Planners always, of course, an appreciation for planners. But from the private sector, we are doing planning now that will enable us to continue to expand and improve what we're doing in the communities that we already serve, and to expand how we serve other communities where people have not had as much access. And I would say that is primarily early in the morning and late at night on the weekends. So we have this opportunity to do something that our board members seemed anxious to not wait for our strategic plan, to make some investments right now. And so we're calling them near-term investments, and we have a list of them, and they're going to add up to about $20 million, things that we will start and finish in the next 2 years and then continue on our way.
Thank you, Susan,
Thank
very,
you.
very much. Let's turn our conversation now to some questions. And first, I want to ask the call operator if they've got any questions that have come in that have been dialed in. Any operator, any questions from our dial-in
At
media?
this time, if you'd like to ask a question, please press star and 1 on your touch-tone telephone. You may withdraw your question at any time by pressing the pound key.
Okay.
And once again, to ask a question, that is star and 1. And we will pause a moment to allow questions to queue.
All right, while you do that, I think we can turn our attention to our audience and see if the media here has a question that they would like to pose to any of our panelists.
I have a question.
Sure. If you would identify yourself and your organization.
Bus Line Magazine. Has the pandemic taught you better ways to clean vehicles and facilities? Can you talk a little about that? And once the pandemic hopefully leaves us, do you plan to continue on with more advanced cleaning?
Who would like to take that one?
I will. Yes, it has. We will. I think the advanced cleaning will now be foundational to our cleaning regimen. It's one of the silver linings of this pandemic. Cleanliness is not only next to godliness, it's a sense of safety and security. And we know now it's a foundational bar to attract people back to our system and new writers. So, yes.
And I'd like to add that those are excellent points. I'd like to add this has also given us an opportunity to think about how we configure the interior of the vehicles. So we heard from a lot of passengers pre-pandemic that they, while the cloth seats are comfortable, they preferred a plastic seat or something which would be antimicrobial. They knew that the seat was clean because they could see it. It's easier for us as operators to take care of those, to replace those seats. And we've also gotten more into air circulation. So though the doors are shut on buses or trains, there is a lot of air that's going around, doors are opening, so on and so forth. And in Port Authority, we are adding enhanced air filtration devices on all of our vehicles. Because of course, last year we should always wash our hands. Last year was wash your hands, leave your mail outside. This year is thinking much more about what is airborne and how do we clean that up. So we're definitely budgeting and adding those positions to make the cleaning routine that was all overtime last year is now straight time because we budgeted for that. And I think definitely the perception that if you are in a shared space, what can we do to make that cleaner for folks is, first, it's a foundation of bringing people back, but it's also what the people riding today deserve.
Anyone else want to address that? I think we've pretty much covered it, I think. Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Engineering news record. Susan mentioned being able to, with this new federal windfall, be able to launch a new 10-year capital plan. I was hoping the rest of you could also elaborate a little bit on what projects or capital plans may be ready to move forward now.
May I just clarify, just say, if you were referring to what I said, it's a strategic plan. It includes a capital component. And we have drawn down FTA's funding during the pandemic, so we're not keeping it in a storehouse to wait for a new plan. We've drawn it down for operations and have now that has created local fund opportunity.
I think at GRTC, we weren't heavy in the capital investment side historically. I think that has started to change with the pandemic, where we see that the investment that was put into BRT and the high level of ridership that did get when we put in better infrastructure, when we put in the off-board fare payment at the time, level boarding, more frequent service, better canopies, better lighting, better next time signage. When we put all that investment in, it really reaped a lot of rewards in ridership. And so when we're looking at a future investment, we're looking to take that level of quality of infrastructure and put it throughout the local bus service. So when we're looking post-pandemic for investment, we're looking to leverage as much of that money as possible into the local bus service, better sidewalks, better shelters, investments we haven't historically done.
We have a significant capital project program at LA Metro. This bill will allow us to accelerate a number of mega projects that are over $1 billion apiece. Right now in the pipeline, we have the East San Fernando Valley Light Rail Line that, with the action by Congress, will allow us to accelerate that project to be delivered in time for the Olympics. We also have another branch line, West Santa Ana, that really is in an area of persistent poverty. And when we talk about equity and making sure that the federal investments can actually go to equity-focused communities, that's another one that's in the pipeline. So we're thrilled about the doubling of the capital improvement grant program.
Elaine, what I would also add to you as well is that this is really a first step, a first set of payments over the next 5 years with the new Transportation Act that begins to make the kinds of investment that we need in the public transit industry. It's been an industry that's been underinvested for decades. And whether you look at the U.S. Department of Transportation studies that have been done or the American Society of Civil Engineers, the dollars range from $105 billion to $176 billion of underinvestment in the industry. So this legislation is landmark, but over needed in terms of the timing of it. But our agencies, our industry will put that to good use for state of good repair, to modernize their systems, and begin to expand it where it makes sense in their communities. So we see it as really a much needed overdue investment for public transit.
And Paul, if I may add on to that, Paul is absolutely right. We need to modernize, we need to invest. But getting this one time only lets us clean up the house. If we don't know that that's there next year and the year afterward, it's difficult to build out some of these major programs that my colleagues are discussing. So in Pittsburgh, this will allow us to complete our East Busway, which is one of the first in the country, goes to a very disadvantaged part of our county, connects them to new jobs. This will allow us to replace rail cars, which are 37 years old. Our rail cars could run for president, which isn't even a joke because it's pretty tragic. Our first cars came in when Borderline by Madonna and When Doves Cry were top 10 songs, and I believe we have Preston here who were not born then. And our story is not unique, which is unfortunate. So we will have major projects. We'll also replace bus shelters where the screens are broken, and our communities deserve this too.
Another question. Yes, Misha.
Can you?
Could you just announce your
I'm
name,
sorry,
organization?
I'm just assuming everybody knows who I am. I'm so sorry. Misha Wanick-Lippin with Mass Transit. Can you discuss how the impacts of the pandemic plus the extra money coming from the infrastructure bill will impact potential mix of your fleets?
I will start. Zero emission. It really makes a zero emission future more viable. We are in the process of trying to convert over 2,000 of our bus fleet to zero emission by 2030. A critical element of that is a federal investment to make that substantive change. So I think from a zero emission perspective, we're excited about the possibilities.
I think for GRTC being one of the smaller agencies, if not the smallest agency on the panel, the look for us is as we look to expand throughout our region, 40-foot buses don't need to go everywhere. We don't have some of the micro mobility and the smaller vehicle need. So we have the needs, but we don't have the vehicles to expand throughout some of the more suburban areas. We know that we have low-income populations, and we know we have people who have transit needs that are in less dense areas where 40-foot buses don't make sense. This money will allow us to pilot some of those other micro-mobility and on-demand needs throughout a more suburban region to connect them into some of the urban lines.
May I add, we are going down the zero emission path. We have 10 60-foot, 5-door battery electric vehicles from New Flyer for our BRT project, our new line, City Line. And we have about four 40-foot buses from New Flyer and from Proterra, and we'll have 10 more soon. We built a new garage for the battery electric buses, which is really the only way. You can't do one bus at a time, although 2,000 at a time, Deborah. That's a big capital project, but it is the future, and this federal funding will help us get there.
You know, I want to turn to Jeff Nelson, our APTA chair, who's also a CEO for the Quad Cities system in Moline. And so, Jeff, to the question of how this might impact the fleet mix and what you're all doing, maybe you can share with us a quick moment.
Sure. It's an exciting time, obviously, in transit, but just taking a walk out on the trade floor out there, you can see some tremendous changes in how we do public transit on the fleet side. We embraced battery electric early on in 2018 and are slowly built a system, I guess, that's going to be built around the battery systems. And we're looking forward to adding some on-street charging elements. But the uniqueness to this, the community's embraced it. This was one of those things that pre-pandemic when we rolled out the battery electrics that the community loved. And as we came into the pandemic, I think just the quality of service that the ladies have all talked about really shined. And I think when you really look at what the newfound money is going to provide us, it's going to provide us an ability to really take that next step at what transit can do in a community. And I think one of the other challenges we have, and I'm really looking forward to, is how we define that trip. We're always so focused on that seat, and I think what we found through the pandemic, it's not about the seat, it's about getting that person to that job, getting that person to a medical, get that person to school. And I think it's created a new opportunity for us that I think as an industry, we're going to excel and truly deliver a product that I think is going to be pretty remarkable in our communities.
Thank you, Jeff. Let me turn back to the operator. Operator, any questions in the queue for us?
Yes, we do have a question from John Murray with the Denver Post. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I just had a question about commute patterns. Those obviously have changed quite a bit, and some of the rating agencies project that they won't come back in the same ways that they were pre-pandemic. Bus service can adjust to changes in commute patterns and as well as in just ridership patterns and demand. But fixed route rail, those are big investments, and those are harder to adapt, I would imagine. So I'm just curious what challenges the 5 agencies see in dealing with daily rider or lower ridership on those commuter-serving rail lines and how they adapt to that going forward.
Great question. So, Catherine or
So this is Deborah
and perhaps
Johnson
Deborah.
with RTD.
Great, Deborah.
Yeah, so hi, John. One thing's for certain, and I will yield the floor to my colleagues momentarily, but as we talk about the investment with rail, one thing that we've seen is that there's been an abundance of ridership as we look at the weekend. And during the course of the pandemic, as we've all seen, there's been a yearning for people to get back to social activities because folks have been teleworking, they have not had the same interaction. So with that, I believe it gives us an opportunity to be more flexible and agile as we schedule because people could go to the theater, different sporting venues, and things of the like. And while there were traditional patterns of bringing people from outlying areas, perhaps the suburbs, into the downtown core, we now have an opportunity to be more flexible with our planning and garnering a better understanding of where people like to go and making adjustments as opposed to having a designated rush hour, be more flexible around the times in which people are traveling, especially looking at partnerships when there is a big event. One thing that was reminiscent of that here in the Denver metro areas during the course of July when the city hosted the Major League Baseball All-Star Game is an example clearly that we can look to, recognizing that folks were utilizing various aspects of rail and fixed route to gain access to those activities. So I think if anything, rounding out the response is being more flexible, rewriting our story in reference to not being as good as our last rush hour, but it's basically being the best we can during all times of potential travel. Thank you.
Stephanie?
Nope. She said it. Commute is no longer king.
Commute
She
is
said
not.
it. Yeah.
And John, this is Catherine Kellerman at the Port Authority in Allegheny County. That's a transit agency in Pittsburgh. We're definitely seeing that the role in our transit-oriented communities is something where we need to be investing. We have an unprecedented opportunity as Build Back Better is winding its way through Congress with funding allocated toward affordable housing. And, so historically, we've always talked about connecting our communities to that job, which could be an hour away. Could we make it faster? Could we make it better? We are major landholders. Pittsburgh, we are potentially the fourth largest landholder in the city of Pittsburgh. And throughout our county, do we have an opportunity now at our rail stations to put a clinic there as opposed to invest in the fares to send people across the county to a clinic elsewhere? And we've got this robust investment there, so it is an opportunity for us to expand station improvements, housing improvements, walkability improvements, but that frequency is key. If we make the mistake of cutting back our frequency either on rail or bus because we don't see that ridership, we miss that sweet spot where people can build a life around transit. So as these travel patterns are changing and the world continues to move, we do have some very good bedrock that we can build on.
Great. Operator, any other questions in the queue?
We do not have any further questions on the phone at this time.
Thank you. Any other questions here in the audience? Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you for coming and participating in the press conference today. I certainly want to thank Jeff and Catherine and Stephanie and Julie and Susan for a really great conversation. Thanks for sharing your insights. And Deborah, of course. Thank you. My colleague saved me on that one. Boy, Deborah would. Thank you, Deborah, very much in Denver. We miss not having you here in person.
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That concludes our press conference for today. Thank you.
And this does conclude today's program. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at any time and have a wonderful rest of your day.